started.
Welcome everyone to the All Nations Food and Arts Festival. This is our final day of the festival, and it's just been a wonderful month of being able to celebrate and honor and feature all of our wonderful Fuller students. And so this morning, we're really grateful to have Sue Schmidt with us, who's going to share about her quilting. Sue graduated from Fuller with an MDiv in 2019. An avid quilter, she enjoys playing with pattern, design, fabric style, and quilting. When not quilting, she's pastoring, gardening, reading, or enjoying her grandkids. Sue also just recently was ordained in the UCC denomination, and she was also a 2-year member of our Fuller Student Council and was extremely instrumental in helping our council learn how to really serve and represent our online student body. So I'll turn it over to Sue and ask her to share a little bit about what she's going to share with us today.
Thanks. So a couple of years ago, actually several years ago, I took up quilting, and just a second, but I can only see you still, but I'm assuming that you're on my screen, right? Okay. Okay, sorry, I'm just gonna switch my view here. Okay. So I took up quilting a long time ago because I was fascinated with patterns and design mostly. And I did traditional quilts for a long time. And in the past couple of years, I switched over to more non-traditional quilts, and I also fell in love with batik fabric. So batik fabric has a lot of different color and movement in the fabric itself. And that's one of the reasons that I love it. It's not static like a lot of traditional cottons, but depending on where you choose to use the pieces of the fabric, you can even have very different shades in the same fabric. The quilt that's behind me is one I started, I think, 4 years ago and finished last year. So it took me 3 years to work on this quilt. The thing that drew me first to this quilt is the pattern, and the pattern's called Radiant Star or New York Beauty. And when I saw it, I loved the fact that it has 2 different types of stars or suns, depending on the size. You can see here at the top, the large circle, and that has lots of really tiny, skinny points that come out, and then this size is just a little more squat. So I decided that I was going to use this pattern in some way, and that's often what happens with me is I start with an idea and I start with a picture and then I tinker with it because I don't like what they've done. I don't like the color scheme. I don't like how they set it up. This one was originally set up kind of flipped so that it was coming down like that, more like a book page rather than set more like a portrait than a landscape. But I wanted the landscape. So that was the first thing I had to decide. And then once I decided, okay, I'm going to use this pattern, these 2 sets of patterns. Then of course, the big question that I usually start with is what colors am I going to use? And this quilt is a very fun quilt because I started out with 2 fabrics, I think from Joann Fabrics, which is my local store. And that was the beginning. That was the greens and the blues, and a very particular shade of blue I found out, which is very hard to match. But that's what I had. And then as I kept moving, I realized I needed more and more and more and more fabrics. So there were hunts going on in making this quilt in different fabric stores around the country. So I have fabric from Sanibel Island in Florida. I have fabric from another quilt store that's about an hour away over the mountain. I have fabric from a quilt store in Virginia, where the woman herself makes her own patterns, and she's a well-known fabric designer. And And so each quilt, each time I look at the fabric, I can say, oh yeah, I remember I got this there or that there. And I would run out of fabric. It was a very organic process. So I get to a certain point, I go, oh, I have no more fabric left in the quilt. Is it still big enough? So then I'd have to go out and figure out how that was going to work and sew little pieces. So that is often my creative process. It is very exploratory. And I play and play and play and play and are frustrated and frustrated and frustrated. I feel like Rembrandt, you know, or somebody, there's like 25, there's 100 sketches, right, of this thing. And he's this angle and that angle. And I'd say, oh, I've got it figured out. And I'd take a picture of it. And then I'd look back at it and I go, oh, I don't like that at all. Or then I turn it around and then I go, oh, well, if this color's up here, that works better. And I had something in my mind that maybe didn't work out or maybe did work out. And anyhow, the ironic thing about this is even though it looks very free form, it is very, very logical. It's a very tight form. It's not free form at all. And I thought that's really funny because I'm a very logically minded person. And so what looks good to me has to kind of set. For it to feel like it's restful in my brain, it has to set. So I'll show you how this is very organized. And that's, I have 4, I started out with 3, but I have 4 big circles. And you'll notice that this is against the edge here with 2 little squares on the top, and it has 2 little squares on the bottom. On each corner, there's a little square complete. This is at the bottom and this is at the top. And in the middle here, you have, it's actually 6 squares, but they mirror, everything mirrors each other. Everything mirrors each other. And that wasn't my intent at all. My intent was to have something very free flow, forming, you know, organic, and it just wouldn't work. It wouldn't be happy. And when I did this, I loved it. And it wasn't until later that I realized how strict it was, how orderly it was. And I went, oh, well, best laid plans of mice and men. You try to do something one way and it does it another way. But there is still within this a lot of room for variety, which I think is fun. So even though this is a half of a block and this is a half of a block, it's different up here. This is 2 sets of little corners and they go in different ways. This is a reverse of this one. And then in the center, it's nice that it's like the full block and then a half block. So there's enough of a variety and enough of it that it feels like it's still very moving, even though it ended up being rather straightforward. After all those months and months of playing around with it, it was a very straightforward pattern that worked. So that was the second thing. I mean, I found the fabric, I started playing around with it. I did the squares, and then literally a year of playing with how it was going to work and adding different colors and making it actually bigger, and then going back to it and then adding it. So one day, it was the day that I actually said, this is it. I've got it. I've got the pattern. I'm so excited. So then, of course, you put the entire piece together and then it's time to quilt. But before I get into that, I'm just going to go backward and talk about a little technique that I use when it comes to a quilt like this. I do not sew this just on, just by cutting out the little pieces. There's lots and lots of little pieces here. I do something that's called fabric, that's called paper piecing. And so if I would have been more thoughtful, I would have had a piece to show you, but I don't, sorry. Anyhow, what that means is you have a piece of paper where the pattern, so for instance, this a quarter, and this, all the little round pieces, all these little round pieces here, big and small ones, were actually printed out on a piece of paper. So I would have a piece of paper that was a bit of a circle, And then the little squares or the little triangles would be out on that piece of paper. And then I would actually sew the fabric to the paper, turn it over, sew the next piece to the fabric, turn it over, sew the next piece to the fabric, and turn it over, and so on. So that all of the points, as much as possible, can be perfect. Because of course, if I have a very logical mind, I want all my points to be perfect. So that's the challenge, and that's the technique. It's called paper piecing, and you can Google it online if you want. You can understand a little more about it. So I paper pieced, I organized, I got all the fabric I needed, and then it was time to quilt. And for this quilt, I had a new challenge for myself, which was that I was going to free-form quilt with my machine, and I was going to try to make each square a different pattern. So I did have a couple of ideas from the book that I got this quilt from, but it was the challenge that I set myself. And I think that whenever you create, it's always so fun to set yourself a challenge, a new challenge, just not doing the same thing over again or in a different form, but to say, what new technique could I learn? So what I'm most pleased about this quilt, I'm pleased about every part of it, but I think I'm really pleased about the fact that I had a lot of fun trying to figure out how to quilt. So for this, I'm just going to take it off the wall and give you some examples of what the quilt looks like close up. Okay, so of course I can't see myself. If you can see here, kind of the metallic lines, and see how I've got a circle in the center, and then how I have kind of little petal things that are moving out in this square, and then how that's different again from the square next to it. Then we move to a big square. Has some funny little lines moving. I'm going to see if this works any better if I turn it towards the, there we go, towards the window. You can see a little bit of the light. So anyhow, like I said, the fun of this square, the fun of this quilt is that each of these squares is done differently. Some combination of machine quilting that. So it was really a lot of fun. And I think that's the thing that I can get a little obsessive about my quilts. And so one of the things about this quilt, that another challenge was to have fun with it. Have fun with the quilt, make it look whimsical and make it look, yeah, just fun. My theme for this quilt, or the idea that I had for this quilt, was an idea of sun, or of trees and water and sky. So I tried to, around the top here, right, sorry, there we go. Around the top here is leaves, kind of all around the edging of the quilt. This piece here, which originally started in the bottom, and then I flipped it. Is that the way it's supposed to be? Maybe I gave it on, maybe I put it on the wall upside down. See, that's the problem. So then you turn it up this way. I think I did. Isn't that funny? I showed it to you upside down. How do I know that? Because I started, I think, with this way once, but okay. Anyhow, there we go. This piece right here just reminded me more of water and underground. And this sort of up here was more like the sky and the trees showing. So as I sort of pulled it together, that was also the idea I was working with, was kind of imagining a set of trees around a pond or a stream, and the water going, and then the sun or the sky peeking out amongst the trees. So even though it's not truly representational, that was kind of the feel that I wanted to have. So anyhow, this is the correct way of it being seen. now. So I'm just wondering if there are any questions or comments or thoughts.
We haven't had any questions coming yet, but I'm keeping an eye on it. And I wonder, Sue, if this is amazing. Like, I don't think I've ever seen a quilt like that. It's with the different techniques that you've used, which is really, really fascinating. I wonder if you could just share a little bit about kind of where your love for art came from, and where your love for quilting, why you became interested in quilting.
Thanks. I have always loved motion, and I've always loved contrast and pattern. I think what drew me to quilting was color and contrast and pattern. I'm a pattern. I like patterns when I think in patterns. And so to me, quilting kind of takes part of how my brain works and gets a chance to play around with it. And so to me, it's very satisfying to look at a quilt and to see the play of the colors back and forth. It's interesting that in several of my groups, I took sort of a concentration in theology and culture and the arts. And so I was with, of course, a lot of what I would call real artists, people that wrote scripts or were actors or musicians or painted with acrylic paint or watercolor or something else like that. And so it's been a journey even to offer something in, as an artist is so interesting, because I think of myself more as a creative person or someone who likes to create things that look nice, and so it's interesting to sort of say, but no, I guess that kind of could be an artist, or an artisan, maybe. So much of what we've done with the word art, I think, can push, it's kind of like a clergy laity aside, like there's the priesthood of all believers, but then some are ordained. It's kind of like we all are creative, but then there's the ordained artists, right? So I think it's been a challenge to say, no, I'm an artist, I create things and I love to create things. And so I think just fabric is one of those, is a medium that I found that really works for me. Yeah, I can be creative. I've got a structure that I can be creative in. I can be very innovative. There's lots of variety of colors and patterns and things like that. And it just gives me a lot of pleasure. My house is, I say, yes, I can. Here's the quilt that's normally on the wall where the quilt is. That's a very traditional quilt, but what's different about it is this pattern is typically done like this. Typically done like this. It's a chain, but one of my books had it like this, and I thought, oh, I loved the variety of that. So that's a traditional quilt pattern. This is a traditional quilt pattern that was actually hand appliqued.
That is beautiful.
Isn't this gorgeous? It's spring here in Pennsylvania, so this comes out every spring and sits on my sofa. To bring a little daffodils inside. And last year I made kind of a little companion.
Oh yeah, I love yellow, so yeah, I'm always drawn to anything with yellow in it.
And this was fun too, because this has some of that. This was before I quilted my other quilt, but if you see, it has the variety of quilting.
Yeah, that's so neat.
So that was kind of a fun. So I think I love it because there's so many options in quilting, and every quilt you make can be unique, and you can make it. I have a quilt that's here. I'll grab it. Not like I have to go far to find my quilt. Anyhow, this is just a very simple quilt that I'm making for my granddaughter.
Oh, so sweet.
Now, what's
I love the colors in that too.
Isn't this fun? I know.
Very fun.
I'm so happy. What's interesting about this quilt is you can see here, it's got writing all over it.
Yeah.
It's an autograph quilt. So
Oh,
these are friends and family, and we've all written a blessing or a welcome to little Iris when she was
oh,
born.
that's so special.
So yeah, so that's kind of, I mean, it's so much you can do. I think that's the fun of it. You can give them for gifts. They're meaningful. They brighten up your house. And I'd love to, I think the next challenge that I have for myself is to become more of a like the higher end quilters, I could say. You also have people that are kind of, what do they call themselves? Like more fabric artists, or they play more with not just only fabric, but maybe with beads or with different other, sorry, I can't think of the word right now for it. Other creative type things. My mind's leaving me. The thing about being a pastor is that I wear stoles. And so one of the things that I'm looking forward is actually quilting and creating my own stoles. So that'll be fun. So those will be seasonal. And I think I think at one point I could probably do a side business if I hire with that, because I think there's so many creative, imaginative things you can do in a small space, you know, creativity in it. And I think I could put beads, other kinds of fabric and everything on the stoles. And that would be just a really joyful way of bringing quilting into, you know, the arts into the church by what the pastor, if the pastor is in a traditional church and is wearing a stole. So that's kind of the new horizon for me. And I'm really excited about it.
I love that. I was going to say that sounds like something that you could do as a side job for sure, because I could see a lot of people really being interested in some more creative stoles. So that I would love to when you get those done. I'd love to see them.
Thanks. I'll put up a little sign. I'll maybe put a link or so that people that need a stoles heading out will know where to find them.
Yeah, definitely. And then you also mentioned your time at Fuller and being in a lot of kind of the worship theology, the arts classes. I'm just wondering if there's anything that changed or as far as how you see the connection between faith and art.
That's a good question. Trying to scroll back through some of the classes that I had. I think that one of the things that was most interesting to me in the classes that I took was understanding how the practice of art is important in a faith community. So, you know, we often think of doing things well and the time it takes to do things well as something that we do unto the Lord. And so I think there's something about, as an artist, taking your time. Like, this was 4 years of doing, right? But the product when it's done is, you know, it sits in my study at church. It's something that's meant to light and energy and just joy into that space. And I think there's something to be said about being comfortable with the process of being an artist and letting the Spirit work through, and knowing that there is a process of creating art, no matter what form it is that you're creating, that you learn and grow. And that growth and that commitment to the process is part of a spiritual journey. You know, I think of like evolution, like how many years, billions and billions of years, was God through the word, the thought, the word, the spirit, working on how the universe would best fit, you know, how it could be innovative and creative and self-creative at the same time, stable. One of the things that I love thinking about God as an, actually what gave me great hope, besides seeing a ton of study great masters did before they did anything, was thinking about God, where God takes so long in this process and is to take so long in this process of creating and recreating us to be part of God's story and part of doing. And so I think that the process as an artist is something that we join God in process, because God is in process with creation. And there's so much variability, there's so much openness, there's so much potential. Like, what if I had gotten a different fabric? It could have maybe gone in this way or that way. And so I think God has so much openness in God's own creativity. It's like, what if Sue chooses this, in these options that are all good options for her, pastorate, she could choose this, or and then that opens up this possibility, or that opens up this possibility, or that possibility. So I think the idea of creating through some sort of discipline, practice, and connecting that with God's own and commitment to not be done until everything, like God will be finished when God's finished. Jesus doesn't know when that is, but there will be a time when God will go, yes, the project is complete. I'm pleased with it, and I think that's just a lovely thing to think about God as creator in process and committed with us, giving us options. That as a beautiful connection, I think.
Absolutely. I feel like that's a sermon in and of itself right there. Thanks so much for sharing that. That's really profound and very, very true. So thank you for sharing that. And then you mentioned a couple other things you were currently working on. Is there anything else you're currently working on?
Quilt wise, I'll show you my latest quilt. Just very happy. I can easily get to. This quilt's also an example of having an idea for 10 years and being stuck and not knowing what to do with an idea. You see this pattern and you love it, and then you look at it and you go, but I this, and I don't know how to get this out this. Now, there's a solution to that, but it sounds too profound, so I'm not going to try to find it. But what I about this quilt was I love the little kitty. I love their backs and I love their tails, but I didn't like the person had put them together on the quilt. It looked boring, and her fabric choices looked boring. I didn't want to make a big quilt. I wanted to make a quilt that would hang on a wall. Right now, it hangs over my stairway. So after literally 10 years of thinking about this, it was finally time to get started. So here's my little quilt. It's missing a few little eyes, but.
Oh, that's so great. I love it.
Again, now, a quilt like this, you feel like, well, maybe it's not so creative, as the one behind me, which is why I chose the one behind me that feels more arty. But even in this one, how you play with fabrics, how you choose fabrics. Originally, I wanted to make these cross pieces. I wanted to make it look more literal. I wanted to make it look like the cats were sitting on windowsills. And windowsills are always white. And behind it, I wanted it to look like, you were looking out the window. But when I started playing with all those colors, the green behind it, the white, it didn't work. It just didn't work. And so you end up with saying, well, they still look like they're sitting on something, right? But you have to, in a sense, you have to submit to the cats. Like the cats are the main point. And so if another fabric doesn't show them off, you have to say, well, that's that. And then the challenge that I gave to myself on this one was to do a pieced border, because it just
love the border.
Sewing all these little tiny sawtooth things together. So I don't think I have another maybe I have another project, quilting project. I can't think. I think I'm enamored with this stole idea. So my guess is that I'm going to try to, I have to make the stole that I got for a gift, which is lovely, is a little long because I'm not roped. So I have to shorten it and make it a little more narrow. And then I think I'm going to be off to the races with, and I have a really fun idea too for that, because I'm thinking of doing, reusing fabric. So there's, I have, what's kind of fun is I have an old, my mother-in-law passed several years ago, and I took some of her jackets with me. Well, they're too big for me, but they're Chico jackets, you know, which have tons of embellishment and everything. And they were just such pretty pieces of fabric. So I actually cut up one of the jackets and just said, I'm never going to wear this, but I love the fabric. And now that I have the stole idea, I'm like, you know what? I am going to make a stole out of my mother-in-law's jacket. And I think there's something really meaningful about that, you know, it's a sense of carrying. When I'm going to cry. When I was ordained, I had the sense of, I'm doing this for the people that are coming after me. I'm doing this for my daughters. I'm doing this for my friends. I'm doing this for, like, I imagine my friend who holds up a chalice and goes, oh, I wished I could have offered communion, you know? And I'm saying, I ordain you, you know what I mean? Like, offer communion, or, you know, like, yes, this belongs in your hand. Or if another friend, I said, I can imagine you kneeling as I was kneeling and receiving this, you know? So there's a sense in which my ordination felt like it was for people coming after me.
Yeah.
But there's something lovely about making a stole with my mother-in-law's jacket that feels like I can honor the women who've gone before me. And even though I don't think she would, I don't know what she would have thought about me being ordained. They never really even talked about my time at Fuller. So might have been a little problematic, but she's passed on, and I have her. I'm going to drag her into the 21st century with me. So anyhow, no, I just think there's something very meaningful about that to me, about taking and maybe even offering that to other people to say, you know, is there some fabric, you know, is there something from your mother or something from a sister or something that's meaningful for you that I can also put on this stole, that you can have a piece of history? And, you know, that's part of where quilting began, right? In so many places, that quilts, when you looked at quilts, you saw history. You saw fabric from your dad's jacket or your sister's dress or your pants or something like that. And so quilts were a lot of memory making. People didn't go out and spend, you know, goodness knows, I'm not going to tell you how much money I've spent on my quilts, right? Because I'm like, weren't they originally supposed to be like scrap fabric that was hanging around and that you used up to be thrifty? And, you know, we spend now $10, $15 on a yard of boutique fabric. But there's something beautiful, I think, about thinking about how we can use fabric and how we can use memory and cloth and all of that and wear it, you know, bring it with us. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm just brainstorming here, which is always what happens, right? But the creative process in real time to say, wouldn't that be lovely to offer to people? Like, you know, people get memory quilts. Why not a stole that is with something that is meaningful from you, from another person or woman in your life or whatever. So I think that's my next project.
I love it. That's such a lovely idea. I love the thought of, you know, making a stole out of something that's really meaningful, a person that's been really meaningful. And it really kind of brought back some memories. When you were talking about quilts used to be kind of more memory pieces. I remember back in the day, it used to be the t-shirt quilts were kind of the thing where you would gather your t-shirts from many different memories or places that you'd been in the past, and you would quilt and make a quilt out of it. And so those were always like really special to me in the past. So yeah.
Yeah.
Well, is there any place that we can go to see more of your work as you're working on things? Or do you allow people to purchase anything that you create?
I don't at this point have like a website or anything for my quilts. I think probably the best, they take so long to make, they're not really marketable.
Yeah.
They're really, and even now I don't do them for my kids, or I've sort of said, you know what, I don't like a little quilt like this is fine for baby, but I've done quilts and they just, their taste, people's tastes change and all that. So I'm kind of like, that's fine, whatever. But I love the idea of the stoles. And if I do get a site up, I can maybe pass that along to folks, maybe let the REM Center know about that and kind of connect with them, because I think that would be really a fun thing to work with people on specific, boy, I have no brain this morning, on custom made stoles. I think that really would be a lovely thing to offer. But whether, being a new pastor, whether that's something that I have time for right now, we may have to wait for a couple of years for my second retirement before that happens. But people are always happy to, if anyone is interested in quilting or wants some ideas or wants to see what I've done, they can certainly stick up my contact information and they can get a hold of me.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Sue, for sharing your work with us. It's so beautiful and so creative. And I just love all that you've done. And we're just really grateful that you shared it with us this morning. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for the invitation.
Of course.